Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Firewall, the business bycast, where tech meets business. Get expert insights in real-world business leaders, IT experts, and the latest trends in bite-sized episodes. Stay ahead and explore what's beyond the firewall. And welcome back, everybody, to another amazing episode of Beyond the Firewall, where we always bring you amazing speakers, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs about amazing technology that's available today. And today is no different, where we're bringing you an incredible guest, Jeff. Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Araz. Really excited to be here with you today. Yeah, I'm an entrepreneur of over 30 plus years. I specialize in supply chain and technology. What we do is we make inventory visible, mainly for manufacturers. So that's been my claim to fame. And we've got thousands of customers and lots of stories to share.
That's pretty awesome. And for the guests out there today, like how long have you been doing this today? Like you said, dozens of years. How long is this company? I know I've known you for several years, so I definitely know you've been doing this a while.
Yeah, this portable intelligence began in 2015. I actually exited my previous company, which was a barcoding, selling hardware and scanners to distributors, manufacturers, etc. About 10 years ago, I decided to exit out of that particular business because it's becoming a commodity and want to focus on the software. So I made an offer to my then partners to buy me out. I exited. I also took the software group with me and we rebranded under Portable Intelligence. So today we're more focused around warehouse management solutions, primarily for manufacturers. And we're in about a dozen countries. We have about 200 customers and we're growing about 20% a year.
Wow, congratulations on the pivot there. And I think you read the writing on the wall there, because I can tell you that hardware and products like label printers and stuff like that, that's so commoditized that even half the manufacturers are out of business today in doing that. So good for you on transitioning early. And I think that people have a misconception about warehousing, and I love your phrase here, on one of your marketing collaterals, that your warehouse is not your fridge. Can you elaborate on that? Like, where did that come from, and how do you explain that to customers?
Yeah, great question. Basically, the title came to me. It's my book. I wrote it about 3 years ago. The title came to me. I was having breakfast at the kitchen counter, and this was after my workout, and just minding my own business, reading my paper. And my kids came down. At that time, they're still living in our house, and they're preparing their lunches for their various summer jobs or permanent jobs, right? And so they attacked the fridge, grabbed leftovers before noon. All this stuff was all over the kitchen counter. They're bumping into each other, making their lunches, and before I know it was a complete mess. Right, the fridge was taken out, and then they left, and they just left the fridge for mom and dad to clean up. And that's when it struck me. I go, this is exactly what happens in warehouses every day. People do a free for all into the warehouse. They grab stuff, and when they put it back, guess what? They don't typically put it back in the same place. So there's very little recording. It's basically, assume that it's somewhere in the fridge, and as a result, you have a high waste. I did a review as part of, taking this a little further. It's in my book. And warehouses and fridges are very alike. Fridges waste on average 23% a year of stuff that goes in there. The biggest waste are dairy products and condiments and, of course, vegetables. And who hasn't thrown out cilantro? We never get through the whole stock and we end up throwing that out. Warehouses are close to that. They're about 21% annual waste per year. And that's comprised of obsolescence, write-offs, stuff that they can't find, as well as over-ordering and buffer stock, as we call it.
Wow. Yeah. And you know what? I've been working in the, warehouse distribution on the tech side, and I can tell you, I've seen enough pallets of random one-off products that they just cellophane, and either they bin it or they sell it off to liquidators, just trying to recoup some lost costs there, where they just bundle it all up and just odds and ends and just sell it randomly. So yeah, I can attest to that, seeing that both in action and at the same time in my home. I think I've thrown enough pints of raspberries and blueberries that got stuck in the back of the fridge. So, they don't last too long, especially when you get lost in the back there. So
That's right.
we're going to get into portable intelligence refrigerators now. Now it's a whole new world. So it's going to be fun. So, it's interesting. And the assumption for businesses is, well, I've got an ERP, my, you know, AS400, my ACPAC, my, whatever SAP B1, whatever these amazing ERP solutions out there, they're supposed to tell me where everything is. And isn't that where, explain to me how that is like broken now, like, or how does that not really translate to reality?
Yeah, well, it starts with the authors of the software themselves, right? The people who write those software systems are either finance people, they're either production people. A lot of them don't have a background in inventory or materials management. So the focus typically on most ERP, especially in the manufacturing world, is on production scheduling and and managing your resources, be it your equipment and ensuring that you optimize the use of them. Inventory is thought as a transaction. So a lot of the manufacturers are taught from a very early time that you buy exactly what you need, you make exactly what the customer wants, and lo and behold, you have no inventory. Right now, as a manufacturer starts maturing and getting bigger, they'll land some big orders, and their customers say, "Guess what? I have 100 stores. I need you to make this over this schedule over this year. I don't want it delivered all at once." So you end up having their delivery schedule you have to follow over the say the next year or so. But you need to also make it. So you're now buying in bulk because you want to get the discounts. So now you're bringing this material in at bulk. You're making it at set stages. You're also making finished goods at intervals, and you're storing that so you can meet these delivery schedules. Now you have inventory. You've got raw materials, you got work in process, and you've got finished goods, right? And a lot of manufacturers are not equipped to handle that kind of storage, and their ERPs are not equipped to handle that kind of tracking of materials. So that's where we come into play. I give you a very simple example. A lot of ERPs are set up to do what we call a link to your purchase order. So based on your demand in your production schedule, you may be short part ABC. So the ERP will automatically create a purchase order for, say, 100 pieces of part ABC because that's what you're short on, right? So the product comes in, you place the order, the product comes in, and lo and behold, when it gets received against your purchase order, those materials get immediately issued to the job, right? Now, the problem is you may not be running that job for a week, few days, or whatever, and that product is now sitting on the floor waiting to be consumed, right? The
Hmm.
ERP has faithfully recorded against the work order, and now somebody comes along and goes, geez, I can't find any ABC in stock. You see this ABC sitting on the floor? And they grab it for another job. And we call that job boring, right? Because the product hasn't been labeled. It's sitting in the warehouse, so they assume it's fair game, right? So
Hmm.
so that happens constantly. Another thing that also happens is a lot of systems have what they call auto issue, and that's based on the quantity produced. So as product comes off the line, say you produce 10 widgets of the system, the ERP will automatically issue the raw materials that went into those 10 widgets, right? That's called auto issue. But what if your auto issue calculations are incorrect, right? What if you've got a bit more waste than normal, right? All those don't get recorded. So what happens is your inventory starts going sideways in a hurry, little by little. And before you know it, your system, what you see on the floor and what you see on the ERP are wildly different, right? But you probably say to me, but I have inventory counts. My inventory counts will save me, right? Well, guess what? Inventory counts are designed more for the, I call it the bean counters or the finance guys, right? And so they'll do a annual physical. They'll count it all up. They cordon off areas. They freeze certain things from counting. And it's a bit gamified. It's usually a 3-day process. And they come out of there with 90% plus accuracy, and they're all waving the flag and happy about it. But the reality is they really haven't improved the accuracy of the inventory. They've just more or less verified that they have this quantity in hand. They don't really track where the actual inventory is. And that's where a lot of companies don't do cycle counts. Cycle counts is needed because it now also tracks not only the quantity accuracy, but the location accuracy. So doing cycle counts is critical to maintaining your inventory accuracy, understanding the limitations of your ERP and really how it's designed and how it works, because a lot of times the ERPs create these so-called blind sides within the system that don't properly track inventory. So no surprise, most places I go to, they're at best probably about in the 80% accuracy, if that. And if you take into account things like location, their inventory actually even goes further down. A lot of companies are typically, if they're manual, are typically 2 to 3 days behind in their accounting or recording of inventory into the ERP. So if you have, for example, say $1 million on hand inventory, divide and which means you move that every month to say that means you're moving roughly $50,000 of inventory every day during the workday, right? You're 3 days off, which means you're not recording the movements of the inventories for almost 3 days. That's $150,000, which is roughly a 93% accuracy, which is probably saying, that's not bad, 150,000 out of the million. That's roughly, 93%. But you're not recording where the product actually is in the warehouse, and you're also assuming that all the recording that does take place is actually accurate.
So how does your product bridge that gap? Are you telling me you shorten all of these processes and gaps that you're telling me right now?
Yes and no. I mean, part of the problem is that there isn't enough recording of inventories. So we do what we call the four cores of inventory management. The first four cores, if you do those properly, you'll get accuracy into the mid to high 90s. They consist of the first core is PO receiving, the second is put away, the third is transfers, and the fourth is inventory counts, or more specifically, cycle counts. And the whole idea is that companies need to perform these four basic functions well, and a lot of them don't. And they assume that somebody's going to enter it. They assume that more likely it's you're going to rely on things like tribal knowledge, people remembering where product is in the warehouse, and they just assume that that they'll eventually find it. Right. So at the end of the day, you don't have very high inventory accuracy because a lot of companies do not do the four cores well. And a lot of our implementation practices begin at that very point, because what we're trying to do is establish a foundation where they're doing the four cores well. And then from there, they can expand into things like production and then outbound, which is picking and shipping. I
Interesting.
hope that answers your question.
No, it does a bit. At the end of the day, I'm not as versed in this space. So for me, it's a big knowledge curve that I'm trying to adopt here. But looking at a typical small business or mid-sized warehouse, 10,000, 50,000 square foot distributor or manufacturer of goods, products. I have a few clients that are in goods distribution running, 30, 50,000 square foot facilities. The typical conversation is I got a barcode system. I've got, typical bin system, inventory optimization. How are you sort of elevating that conversation when you're walking into a company today and really showcasing some of the gaps within conventional ERP systems?
Yeah, I mean it's about really putting in a real-time system. A lot of companies are still paper-based, even though they have an ERP. So they'll write it on paper. Like for example, take a purchase order, it arrives, or a package slip, it arrives from your supplier. They take the package slip, they write down, what they received, that the goods look like in good shape, and then they hand off that paper to accounting to do data entry. Or they'll have, say, a terminal in the receiving area, and they'll manually key it in when they have time, right? And sometimes they may have to produce a label, which would have their own internal part number on it, and then they slap the label on it, and then they do a put away. Sometimes the put away is done to a what we call primary location, a designated spot, but many times it's put in the first available slot that's open. Factor in, say, let's say your supplier was having a clear out sale, right? So procurement, of course, buys a little extra. So in comes a whole skid now, right? Well, guess what? I can't put a whole skid into that shelf where it normally goes, right? So now they have to find a box stores location for it, which is typically either higher up in racks or they just leave it on the floor somewhere at the back. And now your product's in two locations, right? So on and on it goes. And that's assuming you've got proper labels on them. A lot of times they'll put one label on the box and then that label disappears because they're shipping it or something like that, right? And
Right.
do they also record where the product's in the box storage? Typically not, but the system thinks it's all in that one location, which is designated for in the ERP. So again, you're now relying on tribal knowledge. Interesting enough, you think when we come in with our system, the warehouse guys would be really excited to have our system, right?
Yeah.
Guess what? They're not. They're often a little threatened by it because, where there's knowledge, there's power, right? And the fact that you've got a couple tenured workers in the warehouse who know where everything is, place does fall apart when they go on holidays or whatever, and they love that, right? It's a bit of a threat to them. What we find in implementing a system is the change management piece, where you get ownership or senior management pushing in our system for better visibility, improved accuracy. They may have a client that has special labor requirements, especially if they get into a big box retailer. You have to deliver what we call an SSCC 18 barcode label, and as well as send advance ship notices to them. So it gets really complicated quickly, and then you have more reliance on people. So as a result of that, you're getting pushback from the warehouse people who are threatened a bit by the system and who feel that they don't want a system monitoring them, right? So therein lies the challenge to deployment. It's not just about putting in a system, training people how to use it. It's also about that change management as well as what we call facility prep. Often the ERPs or the accounting system that a company is using is not set up to support barcodes. Simple example, if anybody's using QuickBooks out there, the QuickBooks basic version has no inventory. You've got to create your own inventory system, which we have, that has bin locations, etc. Right? As
That's
well,
pretty cool.
yeah, as well, many times product comes in that's pre-labeled. The labels that you see in the grocery stores, they're called UPCA
Yeah.
barcodes, right? So a lot of times those can be used, and there's a setup typically in the ERP called a part alias function, where you would designate that supplier's barcode number as equivalent to your own barcode. So now you don't have to label; you just have to scan the supplier's barcodes.
So your product scales from a small business. I call it small business, a company that's using QuickBooks. Today, most people want to use QuickBooks Online, which I know I have legacy customers that are on enterprise because it has better functionality. It has more integrations and third-party products. So your product today, if I'm on QuickBooks Online or one of these, cloud-based basic accounting packages, Xero, whatever, I can technically start with your product today as a small business, get myself a 3,000 square foot warehouse for product distribution. And then I don't need to buy a sophisticated ERP. I'm using you as the warehousing inventory. And then from there, it just does all the transactions within the accounting software.
Yeah, as long as you're creating purchase orders and, as they call it in QuickBooks, estimates and sales orders, then we can pick and ship against it. Depending on your level of sophistication, you may run out of a runway fairly quickly, especially if you start getting into the big box retailers, and you
Sure.
may need to upgrade to, say, a more sophisticated ERP. But certainly, shockingly, I've seen a lot of big companies still on QuickBooks, but they've created this moat of other systems, and that's obviously a different conversation where they need to do a lot of maintenance around, of keeping the QuickBooks, which is really just a glorified general ledger. If you look
Yeah.
at
But it's still 80%, I think, or 80 plus percent is, QuickBooks has the lion's share of Canada and the US. I think BYOD is still a massive
it.
platform in Europe and in Australia. I believe it still exists, believe it or not. And Simply Accounting, like these, and then there's Zero and FreshBooks, and there's so many for small business. And now Zoho's come out with their accounting package. At the end of the day, a lot of businesses, even decent sized companies, could be doing a few $1 million a year. I have a client who's in chair manufacturing. Like they need to buy the wood, they need to buy the stain, they need to buy the products, and they manufacture, nice chairs here in Canada. Not a high volume business, but at the end of the day, it's a good business, and they don't want to spend $100,000 on an ERP system. So, this is where the gap is today, is finding an accounting package that does the inventory management without spending 6-digit figures today is very challenging, because a lot of the legacy, let's call it Fox Pro and Access database platforms and legacy software platforms, they're all gone. And so now you're left with these very
Quite a gap.
small, yeah, there's a massive gap. It's like even Sage, which I used to be a partner for Business Vision, which was, I would call it the mid-market product. Today, they're pushing everybody. They just announced literally, I think 90 days ago, official. And this time it's the real deal. End of Business Vision. We're at Christmas this year, 2026. We're done. So you either are being pushed to simply accounting, which is no warehousing and no inventory management, or you've got to go to ACPAC, and that's like 5x the cost. And so most businesses that are in that smaller bracket, and I'm not talking like a couple $100,000, could be a few $1,000,000, they're still going to go down to simply because they're not going to want to spend 6-digit figures on an ERP system like ACPAC. So and it's not the cost of the software. It's really actually the implementation, the customization. For the listeners out there, all these products have a very cost effective price point to buy the seats, but the customization, the framework to actually get it to go live ends up being a $100,000 endeavor. So that is where Business Vision and a few other platforms were in that 10, 20, $30,000 range where a lot of people used to go to when you were a mid-size, I call it mid-size, 1 to 10 million, $1 to $20 million business. It was a comfortable buy. So yeah, I think your product has got a great market opportunity there.
Yeah, and we think so too. Yeah, and even if you buy an accounting package or or an ERP with a inventory module in it, they don't offer real time. So that's where you still need those, some sort of data collection capability on the floor. You've probably seen the mobile handheld computers use that, places like Home Depot or Costco where they've got a large PDA type device with a pistol grip on and a keypad. It's running Android, and you need those kind of devices out there to give yourself the real time data collection. So the whole point is that you need to push and collect the data at the point where it happens. So you're getting that real time data. If you're only recording it 2-3 days later, or even later on in the day, chances are it's going to be entered in incorrectly. Manual entries are typically 1 in 4. So you're right away, right off the bat, you're only going to be putting in data that's 75% accurate.
Correct.
So that's why barcodes make a lot of sense. And I know we're going to get into a bit of topic of AI and talk to you a bit about what we're doing in terms of future state.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely want to get into hardware and software in a minute, but I did want to get to one last question about this TED. I saw this thing on your website about TED, and I wanted to understand what this task TED thing is. Well, can you kind of explain to us what this, let's call it, exclusive package you have today? It's trademarked, so I'm all excited because everyone sees TED and everybody thinks about TED Talks. So obviously you've coined it pretty effectively right now. I'm pretty excited.
Well, thank you. Well, TED stands for Task Engine Distributor, and what it represents is part of our smart warehouse portfolio. So on the one side of our smart warehouse portfolio, you have your standard conventional technologies, a warehouse management system that plugs into your ERP or your accounting package, which we just talked about, right? So right off the bat, you've got barcoding, you've got scanning, and it's all real time. Now, there comes a point where, and this is designed for more larger companies, but I'll talk a bit about TED as it is today, and then TED 2, the product that it's going to be next generation of it, so to speak. What happens in larger facilities is that you get a lot of left-hand, right-hand issues, coordination issues, right? So picture this, right? You're running a manufacturing line. You run out of product ABC. You do a rush order, right? It's going to come that same day. Product ABC finally arrives, right? And it gets received, sits there. Meanwhile, the machine is starting to go idle, right? Waiting for it. Who knows? It's like the old adage, if a tree falls in the forest, who hears it, right? So what TED will do is actually immediately alert the users of the production, the production team, the material handler, that this purchase order has arrived, it's been received, it's now waiting. So instead of effecting what we call a put away, what they'll do is they will take it straight into production. So in effect, what we've done is we've created a hot list of product that needs to be monitored. And so that's what TED does. So they'll immediately send the call to the person to do it. On a more sophisticated level, let's say you and I were picking orders that day, right? And I was having a bad day, maybe out last night and watching too much of the soccer, etc. And you happen to be killing it that day, just picking orders like crazy. Meanwhile, the truck for my pick order arrives. I'm behind, right? What TED will do is it will take some of my tasks, reallocate them to you. So now you'll be picking my order and actually helping me finish the order, right? And of course, I get noted, etc., right? It becomes an opportunity. So there's that, how we call it, that monitoring and overview around task assignments. Likewise, for example, where we've deployed TED, we've got it in working in a manufacturing or automotive manufacturing facility where they're producing parts. And as the bin gets full, TED would automatically tell a driver to come take the bin away and also bring an empty. And in the past, what the drivers would do is they would do what we call drive-by. So they'd be driving around, checking everything and seeing what's happening, right?
Uh,
We eliminate that, and we also track how many tasks they do, how far they drive, right? And how quickly they're completing those tasks themselves.
that is pretty amazing, and right now I'm going to pivot to that. So when you talk about being able to identify your staff on floor not being able to keep up with the orders or having a slow day, being able to do that, today everybody's going to be saying that must be an amazing AI feature, um, and pretty amazing, because obviously from a management perspective, that's like the information I want. From an employee perspective, they're going to feel like butt, because they'll be like, oh, you're spying on me and you're watching me and whatever and all. But at the end of the day, you're right. Like at the end of the day, what's the cost to the business when picking and packing and not getting it on the truck when the truck's sitting in the bay door for an hour waiting for you to finish up your order? That's big money. That is huge money, between the driver, the truck sitting there idle, and the bay door also potentially being blocked up because we're behind on picking it. So I couldn't imagine what that cost would be, every day, one truck per day, what that looks like to a warehouse distribution. Like Amazon would lose their mind. So I already can
Yeah.
only imagine, you
Yeah,
know.
and yeah, and a lot of the big companies are doing that today, or attempting to do it today. But the flaw with that, and it's also the flaw with our system, is that workers hate it, right?
Yeah. Oh, I
There's
can see it.
pushback.
You're
There's like
spying on me.
it's Big Brother, right?
Yeah.
So now on to TED 2, the new version, right?
Yeah.
TED 2 is, everybody's creating this so-called digital twin, right? Digital twin of a facility, and they're doing simulations, right? We're creating a digital twin of the worker, right? So this digital twin is going to be your companion, your assistant. We're calling it the warehouse assistant. And this twin will not only train, it'll monitor, and the best part, it'll mentor you and tell you
Wow.
how to improve, how do you compare against your peers, right? And what you could be doing to be as good as them, right? So, and what we're seeing is a lot of, we're going to be piloting it this fall with a couple of our customers. And because there's such high turnover in warehouses, I mean, the average Amazon worker is 8 months
Yeah.
in warehouse, right? The cost of training is horrendous, right? So they're literally giving people a scanner and they say, good luck, and you're in this million square foot warehouse. So you're going, okay, where do I go get stuff, right? So you can imagine you're pretty inefficient, even though you're getting directions as to how to do your job. So imagine a system that will not only, be tracking, but, when the time comes and you're doing a transaction, you go, geez, what do I do next? Yeah, I have to enter in the purchase order number, I have to select the line. How do I do that? Right? What TED 2 would do, it'll pop up and go, okay, next thing you need to do is enter it, select the line number. So it's basically aware where you are on the screen, and it actually guides you with little arrows as to what to do next, right? As well as it can pull up a video. Now, the added bonus, and this is where it gets a little tricky, is TED 2 will actually complete the transaction for you, right? So let's just say, you know what? I don't have time to enter all this stuff, but trust me, I'll do this transaction. I'll put it in the location. I'll pick the right quantity. I'll do it. Okay? Scout's order. So TED 2 will complete the transaction for you. But if you continue to do that and do something different, then you'd be called on it, and your ability to have TED 2 finish those transactions may be suspended until you get more in line. So, and on top of that, we also do the mentoring as well, where it's going to tell you how you're comparing against your peers. It'll tell you where you need train to improve. And on top of that, it's going to be also monitoring and giving you tasks so that if you do fall behind, you can get help from your peers.
So it's interesting you're even addressing this because I've had this conversation with dozens upon dozens of entrepreneurs, business owners, AI leaders and stuff like that in the fact that AI is at the cusp of, replacing a lot of jobs. I call it white collar jobs is going to be definitely the biggest impact, but and we're not yet at robotics to the level that we are going to be at in 10 or 15 years. So there is the window of this manual portion that still needs to be done. But the challenge now is the augmentation. And I call it augmentation, just like you're proposing now, is robotics, AI, machine learning will be able to support the human worker to get up to speed quicker, faster, and be able to bolster it. And I find it very interesting because I see a lot of application to this everywhere in the warehouse. So no longer just in the picking and the shipping and the packing and everything. Like we could be talking about end to end, warehouse management from everything. Like it's not just about the one vertical because every business today is being struggled about the labor force. Like it seems like, even if you look at fast food today, the training of employees to go to fast food is pretty labor intensive. There's a lot of time spent and in most places like fast food, short lifespan, 6 months, maybe. Nobody's working at a fast food chain store for 5 years. Unless you own it, you're not living there. So these processes and these platforms, kudos to you guys that you're coming out with this TED 2. I think this TED 2 thing may be broader than even you may even think about, but I think that is a massive up on a lot of companies that will need to take advantage of this, even if they're not using the entire portfolio, because training is the most expensive portion of
Oh
any
yeah,
warehouse
that's true.
facility today.
And there's four levels of TED, or three levels of TED 2. It's the first is the training base, right? The second is monitoring. The third is mentoring, right? So, and ultimately, TED 2, they're talking to each other, right? It's seeing what's happening with the other TED 2s out there, your twin, my twin, et cetera, right? So it's tracking how you perform, how you pick. So it's also learning how to optimize your warehouse, right? So we've created a AI-based slotting tool that allows us to reslot a warehouse, right? And we've done a couple of pilots. The improvement has been a 30% uptick in pick quantity, 2 hours a day in time savings, right? And we've made over 136 recommendations on how to reslot their warehouse for a particular customer in Chicago. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And we did that just by looking at transaction data and seeing how they're picking all the different locations. That maybe we'll consolidate some of those locations. Maybe we'll drive them differently in terms of their pick paths, right? And because we'll basically mirror their best workers. And then lo and behold, we run the simulations based on the best worker, based on reslotting, and we got huge time savings. And that's just the start, right? It's what's out there is phenomenal. It's usually, again, with AI, it's all about the data, right? So we're relying on transaction data as best we can, but there's going to be a new set of metadata that needs to be created to properly support forecasting, as well as prediction, as well as decision support. So a lot of new data sets are going to be created to support the AI as well.
That's incredible. So you're telling me right now, and this is just the tip of the spear about what this product can do, is you're using AI now. We're tracking the forklift, we're tracking the employee, we're tracking also the purchase orders and the pick orders to say your bins are too far apart, they're not in the ideal location. This is the extra wasted time. You can differentiate the different types of employees that you have. And then you're optimizing not just from a bin placement, but everything from routing, the scheduling, the whole nine, even so even your volume of having enough staff on the
Yep.
team for the
Right.
picking, packing, and sorting is all being done through or optimized by the AI. So your warehouse manager now is basically bolstered with this much more information and being able to get an extra squeeze out of the business, maybe saving them an extra 20-30% profitability there.
Yeah, and like anything else, you walk before you run. So, the hot list described where you get the alert of product arriving and it needs to be taken to this machine. That's a good start. You build it from there. You don't try to boil the ocean in a day. And the whole idea is that you start applying it in a strategic way, right? So, I described a picking activity where you use TED 2 to help a person pick and get orders out the door, right? And there's another, we had a conversation with a very large auto manufacturer who I can't name
Sure.
because it's incredible how they work. They Everything is planned. They have a full schedule, as you can imagine, when they create their cars, right? And they give that schedule out to their suppliers who deliver just in time, right? And their suppliers do it perfectly. They label it, they send ASNs or advanced ship notices. It all arrives. Lots of flooded digital data. The digital data arrives, the product arrives on the dock door, and then it goes into the manufacturer, into this large tier one company, and they lose visibility of all their inventory. They don't track any of it, none of it.
Wow.
The assumption being that what they planned is what they actually do. So if you get part ABC arriving from your supplier, it's going to go against job 1, 2, 3. It's going to be used at 2 o'clock today. It's going to be picked from this location in the warehouse. It's going to be taken to the floor, this quantity at this time by an AGV or whatever. None of it's tracked. No one's held accountable, right?
Wow.
And they've tried everything to track it. They've tried RFID, they've tried Bluetooth, they've tried barcodes. And so I said, here's how I would do it, right? And it's basically taking their plan and turning it into transactions, what I'm calling a plan action, right?
Right.
So basically we're going to be able to take that plan, convert it into transactions, and then update and ensure that those transactions are I would say, to ensure that those plans are accurately converted into transaction. In other words, they actually happen. We're going to use a series of sensors as well as inventory counts, what we call human in the loop activities, to ensure that, how close are they following the plan. And he says, generally speaking, they're about 92% accurate to the plan. So we got a gap of about 8% that we got to squeeze out, which, as you can imagine, is a huge, huge cost savings for them, right?
Yeah, for
These
sure.
these guys of those plants save a few seconds and they're doing cartwheels. So you can imagine what saving 7% will need to know, or 8%.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, they haven't been able to solve it because the technology hasn't existed until today. So we're going to be using AI to learn based on sensors, based on inventory counts, based on whatever data we can collect passively, because we can't get the drivers or get the people to do any sort of data collection because A, they're in the environment, and B, it'll likely slow them down. So we'll get data as well from their automated equipment, and AI will learn. And in an automotive environment like that, where it's very, how do you call it, very predictable. They don't run peaks and valleys like an Amazon warehouse, right? I mean, Amazon is going crazy right now because they're probably selling a lot of, summer apparel or whatever, right? Yeah, peaks and valleys. Automotive is very flat, which is the perfect environment for AI to learn. It's
Yeah,
going to
well,
eat
that's
it
what
up.
like the automotive guys want that assembly line to just constantly be flowing out the door without having the peaks and valleys, because to turn it on and off is
Right.
very problematic, right? To ramp up
Yeah.
and ramp down production. So,
Uh, So,
agreed. Yeah.
yeah, so you can imagine, it's like they want to run a very set time, and the humans, i.e., the drivers, the materials, often work like crazy to make sure they meet those times because they're given 3 minutes to find something. What if it takes 5 minutes? How do they get caught up? So they know there's buffers in the system there that we can squeeze out and make their plant more efficient by having better location accuracy, et cetera, the inventory, which we're gonna be doing for them. So it was an interesting conversation, you know, and how that AI will later come down to the smaller companies is that we'll have an AI piece that will basically be able to do all the transactions in a warehouse with sensors with very low input from people in the future. We still need people to move the product unless you put robots everywhere, which would be too expensive. So if we get people working according to a plan, we put in the appropriate sensor technology, we could literally have a facility that is scannerless yet real time. As impossible as it sounds, that is the vision.
Wow. That's amazing. So, And are you saying that the technology and the equipment that we need today, is that all available today? Or is this something that's futuristic in that regard?
Most of the equipment we're going to be using is available today. It just hasn't been applied in that way. So very likely there's going to have to be some adaptations made to the existing equipment to support how I want it to work, how I want it to communicate with us.
Right.
So whether it's available in the first this current generation or the next, but it's there. And the whole idea is that you do a POC, a proof of concept, and you do a pilot, and you build that up there. But the important thing is that all these technologies have to be scalable. They have to be done in such a way where they're easy to deploy, easy to expand upon. So that's what we're working on today, is that to use what's there, push it as far as we go, and then say, okay, here's the data that we came out of this we have, and now run your analytics. Right now, this large car company only collects data if the downtime is associated with a defective part from a supplier. That's the only
Wow.
time they collect data. So they're using it obviously for a credit from the supplier, right? If the downtime occurs because of, I can't find something or we ran out, it doesn't get recorded. So they have no idea how to fix their downtime.
Yeah, that's not going to be acceptable much longer. The way I see industries and
No,
manufacturing and everything, you can't do that much longer.
it's it's like we got a rare peek behind the kimono, and it was pretty scary. Okay,
Yes.
I just say,
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you on that one.
yeah,
So, we're in an interesting time right now, and everything is happening so quickly. And I was just at a woodworking manufacturing conference, and I'm involved with several other manufacturing associations all at the same time. So it's interesting seeing, different perspectives and different challenges between new equipment, new software, new technology to produce, to manufacture. I think that warehousing has not been a big conversation with a lot of those associations and shows that I've been to. And it's interesting. But for those companies out there today that are looking for this, what are the most common mistakes today that they should, that is what you typically see when they're selecting a warehouse technology?
yeah. I mean, it's the interface. Like how much knowledge do you need of your warehouse to use the system, right? If you need a guy with 10 years experience to use your system, then you're already behind the eight ball, right? Because, for example, some systems, expect you to know the bin location you're picking that product from,
Right.
right? It doesn't suggest, right? If you have trace or serial number information you need to enter, and you got to go to another screen to enter it, it's a pain in the butt. So the guys don't use the system; they'll key it all in afterwards, right? So the key is the user interface and how easily it allows the person to basically capture data, right? And that's absolutely critical. And also help them in terms of, little things like, for example, hey, you're shipping to this supplier. He does not want styrofoam packaging. He needs paper. Little reminders like that, right? So it's all about helping the user so that you don't need 10 years of experience to use that particular product, right? So that's one example. And then the second one is what we talked at length about was how does the ERP or an accounting system think? Generally speaking, is not give one iota about the inventory, right? So the question is, how do we use the data sets in the ERP so that we can use it to track inventory better? And then what information does the guy need on the floor to do his job well, right? And that's what our system covers off.
So, got a two last questions for you. And obviously, we're getting to the top of the hour here. So, I want to make sure I get them in. So, what's next for portable intelligence?
Well, what's next is that, we're going to be continuing to explore AI, continue to make the interfaces for humans as pleasant as possible. In other words, less interaction, a smarter, more intelligent system that not only, assists you in your work, but helps you complete your work.
Amazing. And obviously, I'm not going to call it a shameless plug, but where can everybody on this podcast get information about you and portable intelligence?
Well, start with our website, www.portable-intelligence.com. And feel free to peruse our website. There's lots of free downloads. There's videos you can review about inventory management. Our I recently finished a small little ebook called The Four Cores. You can download that for free. It's a 25-page read. Lots of pictures, so it shouldn't take anybody less more than an hour to review it.
Amazing. Jeff, it's amazing to have you on our podcast. Mind boggling in respect to how, distribution, manufacturing, warehousing, manufacturing is going on. I just had a guest, which was in the logistics side of things. So the trucking aspect of it. And now we're dealing with the warehousing side of it. So really thank you for being a guest. It was amazing to hear your story, and hopefully we'll get you back soon.
Thank you again, Araz. It was a lot of fun today. And you can tell I kind of like warehouses.
I'm going to look at my refrigerator now in a whole different light. So, you've changed me and my refrigerator relationship as of today. So thank you for all our guests for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. We hope to have other amazing guest speakers on our show in the next couple days. If you have anybody you want to suggest, please reach out to us. Again, Beyond the Firewall, part of M.I.T Consulting. Thank you and have yourself a great day.